Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with season 6, episode 15 of our weekly P&Q&C&A&T videos. That's a long acronym, and as we have started doing, we're going to address what that means right off the top.
Besides being sort of a glorified Q&A.
Yeah, so P is for podcast because we have this also uploading as a video and as audio on all major RSS feeds, or at least all the ones that we're aware of. And you can check out the link in the description if you're on the video if you want to access this in podcast format. And if you enjoy listening to this in podcast format, then you can largely thank our patrons for making it economically I wouldn't say viable, because I mean
feasible.
I mean it would be feasible either way, but for it to make sort of economic sense for us to be for us to upload this in a place where there's no monetization.
Haha, I get it. Economic sense. Economic dollars. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Q is for questions. So that's the Q&A part that quickly became very bloated because initially we were just answering questions. C is for comments because we determined that sometimes people would comment and we'd want to talk about it even though they didn't ask a question directly, and because we were being a little pedantic and anal about it, we called them comments and not questions. And I think initially it was when people had comments that were probably a little bit more negative. when we would want to address them, somebody would say something and we'd be like, okay, well, this next question comes from whoever, and it's like, well, I mean, it's not really a question. So we added C for comments, and then A is for the answers. That's still the Q&A part, and the T is for talking, because when we're talking about a comment, we're not really giving an answer because there was no question that was asked. So we added the T for talking. So there's Q&As, questions and answers, there's comments and talking, and then we added the P because it is now also a podcast. I think that got a little bit maybe muddled even in the explanation, but
so let's jump right in. We got a Q right away.
Yeah,
it even identifies as a Q.
That's true. So Ricky OO says, I got a question. Are you guys thinking about making new content, like playing a new game or walkthrough on console games? Don't get me wrong, your videos are amazing, and especially when you guys discuss about different topics. If you answered this question before, sorry, LOL. And first off, I want to say this is a pretty cool question. I always like questions like this because it's basically like, hey, do you guys want to do more stuff? Because I like your stuff, and that's always cool to hear, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, there's a couple answers to this question, really.
Well, maybe the real question is, because we were talking about just before we started recording, right? I mean, everything takes time. Whether it's making these videos, or even building up the kind of expertise that it takes to be prepared to make the video.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is our lives are so busy right now, right? And you're in the middle of like the final push towards exams with all your projects.
Oh yeah, I have an absolute ton of stuff to do right now. There's a chance that I should be working on that instead of filming this right now, but I think it's reasonable for me to take breaks every once in a while. So this is my break in between work.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate you actually taking the time for this, because I mean, listen, our priorities, right? We gotta keep them straight.
Yeah.
But part of me thinks, I'm busy too, not in the same way. I mean, I've got a full-time job, just life, right?
Yeah.
And other stuff that's going on that I'm not prepared to talk about now on camera. But I mean, honestly, if it weren't for Injustice, we probably wouldn't be doing any more videos, and we definitely would not be doing any recaps. Haha. But these weekly, these glorified Q&A videos, maybe they stop, maybe they won't. I mean, the excuse to make these videos is the questions, right? And they'd probably dry up, if there wasn't any new content. It was all the same stuff. And we'd still have lots to talk about, but the question is whether anybody would even be motivated to listen if they didn't have the draw of the chance of hearing their question asked or something addressed that matters to them about injustice.
Yeah, and I think just talking about making new content for other stuff, we did a while ago at various times upload a couple of videos of different things, and they were always, you know, okay. I think for if you compare them to somebody just uploading that content randomly into a vacuum, we definitely had like a bit of a leg up in terms of like the views that we got and the fact that we would get some like comments and engagement. But just overall, I think we don't have a lot of stuff to make content on that could be regular or particularly unique. If we were making stuff, it feels like, at least to me, that in a lot of ways it would really fade into the background and either not be very good or just be sort of plain and not particular. It wouldn't necessarily be bad, it just wouldn't be anything to write home about.
Right, nothing stand out because there's just so much content getting published on YouTube all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
And here's something interesting that I don't think I've ever mentioned on the channel before. It was a while ago. It was like more than a year ago at this point. I was actually thinking of potentially writing a bit of like a video essay on some of the problems that I had with the first Life is Strange game. And so I ended up...
I remember you started working on that.
I wrote most of a script for it. And then I realized that although I think the ideas that I had were solid and something that I hadn't seen other people talking about online, so not particularly derivative, but the actual script and sort of the format of video essay wasn't something that I was really good at, and the sort of like the quality of my script just wasn't really up to standard, to the point where I didn't think it was worth like doing anything with. And then, you know, also just the actual editing and production part of it would have ended up taking long enough that it was like I just figured that it probably wasn't really worth my time. So that was something interesting. So it's not that we don't have ideas every once in a while. It's not that there's not little stuff here and there that we might be able to create and upload, but it wouldn't really be us diversifying in the way that I think some people are imagining, and like this question is probably asking, because we just wouldn't have enough content with enough regularity. We have...
I think there's only so much value to be placed on screaming into the void.
Yeah. Where
there's not people actually listening.
Yeah.
And there's only so much draw that we can have when we don't have anything to separate us. Like we're doing Injustice, at least we have expertise.
Yeah.
We have years of playing the game and the experience that we can share.
Yeah.
So
for everything else, we would have not a lot of time to do a great job with it, not a lot of expertise to actually make our stuff meaningfully better than other people's, just not a lot of ideas to produce a regular stream of content. There's a lot of sort of barriers for us to really just start doing something else in earnest. This is sort of our one thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if truth be told, I probably read a lot less than I would like, because I don't begrudge it, but it's the opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
That's the most interesting concept that I learned as a kid, was it's not just what something costs directly, it's what it costs you and what you could be doing instead.
Yeah. So I guess the answer to your question, Ricky, is that we probably are not going to make new content other than in the same way that we have been previously, which is really scattered and not at all regular. And as far as branching out goes, I don't think it could be really considered branching out as much as just occasionally posting random stuff that we feel like posting on the channel. Yeah, so we're not particularly beholden to like our specific brand, because we don't really it's not like valuable enough that posting content that doesn't quite fit is bad, but it's just also difficult enough that we're probably not going to end up doing a lot of stuff that isn't sort of what you're expecting from the channel.
And here's the other thing too, right? As a business model, as a financial, economic, whatever plan, it's really actually quite awful. We hear all the stories about how certain YouTubers get big money and stuff, and there's probably a lot of them, but when you think about the number of people that are actually trying, really you have to be, not only do you have to be committed, but you actually have to be successful in a way that's orders of magnitude bigger than what we're doing. So, you know, it's just, in a lot of ways, it's like sports, where you might have the minor leagues where people are, because they're young, they're able to make a non-living wage doing what they do, hoping to get to the big leagues. And then when you hit the big leagues, you might get lucky and have a huge contract. and you know, for the time that you're doing it, that would be great. But then there's so many other people that had to maintain the system so that you had the chance to develop to become a major leaguer.
Yeah.
I think that's really it. And we at least recognize, you know, that we're minor leaguers, and we're okay with that because it's still fun.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think is that because of how long we've been making this sort of content, it has become, I think, routine to a certain extent, and a lot easier because of the sort of expected nature, and we have an understanding of, like, you know, how many hours of work goes into like how many hours of like video output on average, right? Or just not even that exactly, but just understanding what input leads to what output, and it's we're used to it, and so it makes it pretty easy. And we also do enjoy the process. I think it's not that we wouldn't enjoy the process of doing other stuff, but it's a lot more uncertain, and doing anything else feels a lot more like work, you know?
Yeah.
And
for sure.
it feels like work, and I haven't found anything that I am enthusiastic enough that I would consider it like a passion project or something like that, right? To
for
upload.
sure. Never say never.
Yeah.
Never say never. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. So it, like, branching out would feel like work right now, and probably not be particularly successful, which would be fine if there was something that was fun enough to sort of counterbalance the extra effort that it would take right now. But I don't think there's sort of the right combination of factors to make that happen just right now.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
I agree with you.
Our next question, or sorry, this is a comment. We have a letter in our title for this very reason. Our next comment comes from Julius the Shark, and they say, I think obesity is becoming one of the worst causes for cancer.
So this is a follow-up to the stuff about radon that I mentioned last week. So here's the thing. All right, so obesity, is it dangerous? Definitely. Is it a cause of cancer? Maybe, probably. But I guess it really depends on how you define obesity. So this is one of my pet peeves. Okay, so obesity used to be defined by more by weight and body mass index.
Yeah.
And that was the influence of the insurance industry, where they had the mortality tables that certain body mass index. And it makes sense, right? Because how tall you are makes a difference. Somebody who's 300 pounds and 7 feet tall is not the same as somebody who's 300 pounds and 5'2".
Yeah.
But then it became more interesting, I guess, when they started incorporating the idea of waist circumference. And so here's the problem I have. And it's not so much the system as it is the way people interpret now, because people use the limitations of body mass index as a way to dismiss it, as a reason not to use it, because they say, well, somebody who's muscular could have a high body mass index and be classified as obese, while being actually quite healthy. And so here's the thing. I mean, I would be classified, and I've been in a few videos with my face obscured, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be classified as overweight, and I'm not fat, right? Like, it's not. I mean, I'm a little soft, but in certain places,
You're definitely not overweight to the point. You're not overweight in the like medical sense of overweight, where it's like
a risk to my health.
Yeah, any health risk.
But most of the people who are using that and pointing that out and saying body mass index is not useful are not that. Like, the number of people who are actually muscular enough that they skew out of the healthy body mass index and are relatively low fat it's a small number. And so it's actually got a value for a lot of people, but I'd imagine that the people that are being used as an excuse for not using it is probably less than 1% of the population. What's interesting, though, because waist circumference is so cool, is that at a given waist circumference, a higher body mass index, I've seen a study that showed this, a higher body mass index is actually a predictor of better health.
Oh.
So if you can keep the same waist and keep the same body, or have a higher body mass index, where's the weight going to be? It's going to be higher up, which comes from exercise, or it's going to be lower down, which can also come from exercise or a healthier distribution of fat.
That's interesting. So that's actually a way of looking at body mass index that actually prioritizes for a given waist circumference a higher number, which is pretty counterintuitive.
It's not intuitive,
Yeah.
right? Until you sort of think about it a little bit. And so, I mean, when people say, well, body mass index is not useful, really the follow-up should be, so we need to be looking at waist circumference. But most people don't do that. They're just looking for a reason to poo-poo on body mass index because they don't like the numbers that it shows them. So again, like I said, I totally recognize that it has its limitations, but those limitations apply to a very small proportion of the population. And so people, it feels like to me that people are using that as an excuse to maybe ignore their own issues, right? Nobody likes to be told that they're unhealthy.
Yeah.
Or they're somehow not good. Like everybody in their own story, right, feels like they're the hero and that they're, you know what I mean? Like that there's a potential to be like the best at something. So that was my pet peeve.
So that's interesting. We got a little far away from the original point, which is talking about obesity and cancer, but I guess there's not too much to say about that, where I don't actually know what the link to obesity and cancer would be, or if it is present. And
I know, like, for example, breast cancer is higher risk when you're carrying fat. I know that people who get fatty liver from obesity will have a higher risk of, I guess, cirrhosis of the liver, which is tied to cancer. I mean, it's not such a strong link as other things like radon or smoking. But, you know, it's definitely the problem, I guess, too, with obesity is there's definitely moral judgment against it, right? Besides the fact that people recognize it's unhealthy, people judge people who are overweight,
which is unfortunate.
Yeah, because that's not necessarily, I mean, there's so many other things that we do or have that are unhealthy, and to focus on these things, you know, it's like that last refuge, right, where people, instead of racism or sexism or whatever, now people get to be like, it almost feels like there's a need for certain people to judge others.
Yeah, like an in-group, out-group sort of philosophy.
Right. So I think I'd like to at least recognize that, yes, there's an increased risk of trouble, but not that it's not nearly as big as I think some people think, and it's also not great because it's tied into this in-group, out-group thing, like you're saying.
Yeah, because I think that definitely is a natural inclination of people, is to like pair themselves with people who are similar to them. I'm been reading about that some in psychology, where they can make it super arbitrary, where they can literally sort people into one group or another based off of like a coin flip, where people flip a coin and they know that based off of how they flip a coin it determines what group they're in. And if you ask them to like say positive things about both groups, for example, they will tend to be more positive when talking about the people who are in their own group, or just like like little stuff like that. Or if like they get an opportunity to distribute money between one person in their group and one person in another group, even if they haven't like had any like interaction or have had the same amount of interaction, they're more likely to give more money to the person in their group, like on average. So it's just like I think definitely we have a natural inclination to, on pretty much any sort of character trait that we can say, like there's a group of us and there's a group of them, we are likely to be less kind to whoever turns out to be them.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So there we go. Our next question comes from, and we had some searching because we remembered this person has mentioned previously how to pronounce their name. So this is from Ivilo, and then
or maybe Ivilo.
Ivilo,
like closer to E or I. I think it was I.
I think it was.
That was
E.
the comment.
Okay, see, we looked it up beforehand. We've gotten too far from it, so our pronunciation has already been significantly impacted.
And when we did the translator, like Ivilo suggested, they actually pronounced the name what looks like koev into koev. Like
it was koev. So the Google Translate, this is a Bulgarian name, as we've learned from our research, and by research I mean this person telling us, is that it's pronounced similar to Google Translate, except with an E sound instead of an I sound, I'm pretty sure.
Or an I sound instead of an E sound.
Because the Google Translate, if I remember correctly, said Ivilo koev, so I would say Ivilo koev if you're pronouncing it the way Google Translate is. Anyways, their question is probably more important to them than us pronouncing the name correctly. But I guess this is just if you're ever not sure if we were making an effort and just sort of blindly mispronouncing people's names, we do try. We're just not very good at it, and by we,
that's right.
I do, as always, mean me.
I think we're both not good at it, but you just have to be exposed more because you're actually reading the questions and comments.
But anyways, this person's question is, hey, do you not have Arkham Knight Batman, or does he not fit your team? Since in your last video you said he's a great character and actually recommended him as a refund, there was a question about what to get as a refund on your previous P&Q&C&A&T.
Yeah. So we do have him on the account, and it's an interesting point because to me that's the difference between having a good team versus using a great character. Right? So he's good enough. Arkham Knight Batman is good enough that he can basically carry a team. Which means that trying to create a team with any kind of synergy isn't as interesting. So you've got one great guy. You can put in, like, try to make a team out of it, but then the other two guys are not going to be necessary. Right? And actually, in our main account, he's Elite 10. So he's probably going to be the strongest card on the team based on stats. That means we'd be putting out an unbalanced team where the other two members are basically filler. Or, I mean, we could put him on a team with two other really good cards, but they'd sort of be wasted, right? You could use them on other teams where they'd actually have some synergy and actually make each other better.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't need it.
So it's interesting where a single really good card doesn't actually necessarily make for a good team or interesting fights. Because I think that's another thing too, where if you have a balanced team, right, having him on a team means that you're going to be fighting a lot more like Astro Harnesses, right? You're going to have people pretty high up there with stats,
right?
And so it just, from like a practical standpoint, there's not actually a lot to gain from putting him on a team, and just being good isn't necessarily enough in this case.
Okay, so this makes me think of certain things. So the difference between a star and a good team.
Yeah.
So how much do you know about basketball? Because basketball's on my mind. I've been following the Toronto Raptors. It's getting close to the playoffs.
I know a little bit about basketball. I listened to a Reply All episode where they talked in depth about the process.
Right. Okay.
Do you remember him?
I do not.
Oh, okay.
I do not. But the reason why I want to bring it up, because that's a perfect example. Because when you're working with a team with basically a rotation of 9 players with 5 main guys that are the starters that get the most time, then the impact of a star is huge. And so you actually can have a star carry a team, whereas on a team game like baseball, where there's so many different factors, like there's 9 different hitters, there's at least 1 pitcher a game. It's harder to have some person carry the team. So in basketball, it's sort of a better analogy for injustice. So an example of a star who's having a really rotten season this year is LeBron James. So a lot of people consider him best basketball player of all time. I mean, there's some argument to be made whether he's best of all time, but in the last, say, 20 years, he's probably right there. The problem is he's on a team this year, the Lakers, who were supposed to be interesting. He's, LeBron James has had the reputation of carrying the Cleveland Cavaliers last few years. He's made the playoffs, the finals, I think 7 years in a row with different teams. But he's out of the playoffs now because his team has done badly, and I think he's been shut down for the year.
Yeah.
To heal some injury.
Okay, so this is what I know about basketball, and somebody carrying the team. This is basically just going to be a bad retelling of the Reply All episode. But there's a player named Joel Embiid.
The Philadelphia 76ers.
Philadelphia 76ers, yeah. And so when Sam Hinkie was the manager and was tanking their team on purpose for good draft picks, consistently, and just doing a really, really bad job, and he kept saying trust the process. Joel Embiid was the player that started turning it around for them, and he really did help carry the team. And so he nicknamed himself the Process afterwards. Yeah.
All right, that's pretty cool.
So that when you said that, I thought that there was a chance that was where you're going. But yeah, so apparently he's been quite good, and I don't remember enough of the specifics to actually make it into a good narrative. But I know that the Reply All episode dealing with it was quite interesting and memorable enough that I remember the sort of larger shape of it, despite the fact that I'm not really at all interested in sports. So that's probably worth a
okay.
listen if you like podcasts at all.
Okay.
Reply All
right,
in
so
general.
You're gonna have to send me a link after we record this.
Yeah, they do a segment called Yes, Yes, No, where they bring in their boss, who is significantly less tech savvy because they're an internet podcast, and they just explain things to him. And so this was like a inversion where the boss came in with a description of a sports thing, which was like a tweet that was like a joke about sports. So if you want to see sort of if you want like really interesting internet stuff in general, and then in the Yes Yes No episodes you get to sort of get an explanation of like a specific like narrative or like a set of stuff that you need to understand, like a set of cultural touchstones necessary to understand like a joke or a tweet, which is, and it's always like a quite entertaining process to get from like start to finish, to especially if you don't understand going in.
I feel that way about so many tweets that I see. Where
Yeah.
there's a joke, obviously, that everybody gets, and I don't, and then I have to Google around if I actually want to understand it.
Yeah, but it's quite an enjoyable listen. Reply All, it's a great podcast. I was actually listening to that earlier today in one of my breaks in between studying. They're really cool, interesting people. They got a lot of cool stuff to say about the internet. Okay.
All right.
There you
So
go.
definitely. All right. No, you know what though? It made me think of somebody else. It might be a bit more obscure.
Yeah.
Okay, Dennis Rodman.
I think
Dennis
I've heard
Rodman,
the name, but I don't know.
All right. So he's best known now for being a supporter of Northern Korea. He's a basketball player. He was also
Weird.
famous at the time for getting married to Carmen Electra and wearing a wedding dress. But when he was a player and before he got voted into the Hall of Fame, he was known for being a rebounder. So I believe he was originally with the Pistons, and then he became, I guess, got more exposure when he joined the Chicago Bulls on one of Michael Jordan's championship teams.
Yeah.
And the knock on him was he didn't score the most. In fact, he scored not a lot, but he got a lot of rebounds. And people used to criticize him and say, well, if I'd wanted to get rebounds when I was in the NBA and I focused just on that to exclusion of everything else, I could be a ball hog and whatever.
Yeah.
But there's a guy on, Nate Silver's site. Is it 548?
Is that the
438?
like the
428?
the like statistics guy?
Yeah, is it 438? It's
I
the
don't
number
remember.
that needed of electoral college votes that you need to win.
538, I think.
Okay, so there's a guy who's writing for them now who did put together this amazingly detailed case for why Dennis Rodman deserved to be in the Hall of Fame, and he ended up sort of arguing that he might be actually the best player of all time.
Oh wow.
And one of the argument, because baseball is really mature statistically, but even they're coming out with new stuff like wins above replacement. But basketball really counted some basic stuff, and it's only in the last few years that it got into advanced metrics. And so one of the arguments he made was he was pointing out how much of a difference Dennis Rodman made because he played on good teams, he played on bad teams, and he would increase the win percentage, the win total of all teams that he played on.
Oh, okay. So he was consistently like valuable.
Yeah, and it's harder actually because on a really good team, if you're playing on a good team and there's already a bunch of good players and you're added to that, then it's harder to have an impact.
Yeah.
He looked at things like how far above everybody else he was good at doing what he did, and because there were no players actually that were as dominant in terms of getting the percentage of rebounds available in a game. He got the highest percentage of possible rebounds like ever. And using advanced metrics, he was so far an outlier compared to other Hall of Fame players that he made eventually, like he wasn't starting with this, but he got to the point at the end where he's saying, well, listen, if you have somebody who scores more than everybody else, but you could replace him with somebody who scored maybe like 80% as much, but this guy did so much better.
Yeah.
And if you don't measure exact just his stats, like in terms of things he does that you can count, but how much he improves the team. Like Steph Curry apparently makes every combination with Steph Curry, at least the year that they were looking at, he would improve everybody else's play. Everybody else's stats were always better when Steph Curry was on the floor.
So what you're saying is that it's more important than just looking at the fact that he's good. He's good in any context. There's no context where he wouldn't be beneficial to add to a team, and that's something that most players actually can't. You can't say that for.
Right, because the argument used to be that, well, you're going to have a good scorer on a team even if it's crap, because most teams will score 100 points each game, even if they lose. Somebody's got to be scoring those points, right? So even if you've got one guy on a bad team who's scoring a lot of points, they may not necessarily be a good player.
Yeah. But so he's complementary in the right way to actually increase win rate no matter what, regardless of what context you throw him in. And that means that he's consistently really valuable, and he has a similar sort of value on like a really great team or just okay team or a crappy team, just because the way that it influences win rate, which at the end of the day, I guess is the only metric that actually really matters, right?
Right. And the other interesting thing I saw too, I mean, I guess we can get into that, but I was thinking a couple things. Maybe I'll first talk about usage. So the idea is usage. If your usage increases, means that you get to handle the ball the most, then it's not a surprise that you're going to have more stats. But it also means that you're taking away other people's opportunities. So if you're taking 10 shots and you're only, making 2 or 3 baskets, if you take enough shots, you're going to make a lot of baskets. But it's costing the rest of your team. Which is a simplistic way of looking at it, but it's still,
Yeah.
So that's the idea too. I mean, we'll bring it back. Arkham Knight Batman. I mean, he's a star, but he's good on any team. You don't need to make a team with him, and it becomes less interesting that way because he's going to be, if you put him on a team, unless you're wasting him, basically you're going to be just showing the same stuff over and over. It's not as interesting to me.
That's true. And if you're looking at the actual fundamental metrics that are important, like win rate, like win percentage and average match length, he doesn't actually necessarily improve those stats.
Right. So really, you can make more teams if you just leave Arkham Knight Batman on his own and try to play around with other characters who aren't so good to try to make a better team out of them.
Yeah, and you also can grind more efficiently and also have more interesting fights if you don't include him. So there's actually a lot of compelling reasons to not have him on any given team.
Well, not a team that we show, right? That which we're trying to do something interesting mostly instead of, except in these Q&A videos where we actually just have our favorite teams that we grind with because it's basically farming that we're showing while we're rambling on.
Okay, I think speaking of rambling, that might be relevant to our next questions, or not questions, comments. Very explicitly, like we mentioned at the top of the episode, this is pretty much the type of comment that the us adding the C was made for. So this comes from this first one comes from Nicholas A, and they say, "I like how you guys still play Injustice, but F you're boring. Just do a effing recap of the glitches challenge in online season. Stop being boring. Who the F wants to watch a 1-hour video of you guys talking about random crap?" And so I just want to say, first off, thank you. I appreciate that you that you started off by saying you like how we still play Injustice. It's always good to hear from fans. And I guess just to address your point, don't watch our videos.
Yeah, I mean, it's all right. So it's weird. Do you want to read the second one because these are sort of of a kind, 2 of a kind.
That's true.
Can I read this one? This is from Soul Reaper. That is effing R 8 effing ads. Get real jobs. Effing lazy ends.
That was really hard to put together. The gist of that is that we have too many ads in our videos. We have 8 ads in a 1 hour long video, and this is a fake job, and we are lazy. That's the takeaway.
Yeah. So it made me think of a couple things. First, I wish I could put my hand on it, but I remember reading somewhere a story about how, somebody was a content creator. They eventually met the person who had been abusive to them online, and the abuser came up to them like they were friends, and the abuser had felt like it was some sort of like a reciprocal relationship, and had no clue how much of a jerk they were being. So part of me wonders if this is what they're like, and part of me also wonders if, so here's the thing. I always imagine that at some point, if you develop enough as a human being, like if you have enough, I don't want to say have enough of life because it seems like one of those dismissive kind of insults that aren't usually true, but that if there's enough going on in your life that when you really don't like something, it's actually easier just to ignore it than to devote the energy to hate it.
That's actually there's a theory for that, which in psychology based around the fact that as people get older, I think they actually tend to on average become happier.
Okay.
Just as a population, not as a individual basis. And obviously, you know, stuff like happiness statistics can be pretty negatively affected by like neurodegenerative conditions, especially, right? But where the theory is that as people get older, they naturally become better able to select positive experiences or focus more on positive aspects of their life.
Prioritize your time properly.
Yeah, and part of that is just because they have more control, so they can like remove themselves from negative stuff, but also just so that they can like, you know, better, more efficiently seek out the stuff that is going to cause them joy.
Which makes sense.
And so these people are not doing a great job of that. So my suggestion to Nicholas A would be don't watch it if you don't like it. You can see actually if you look at the title of the video, it'll say P&Q&C&A&T right at the beginning if it's going to be a really long one, or alternatively you could look at the length of the video and see if it's longer than you want to watch, and if it is in fact one of those videos you cannot watch them. And then to Soul Reaper, I would say
I actually want to make a point of something.
Yeah.
Actually, as far as the 8 effing ads.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about ads, I guess that's the choice we make to monetize these videos, because I figure, you know, we put in the effort. I don't need to get rich off it, but I'd like to at least, you know, actually technically it's not my money because it's all yours now, but it's like make a bit of pocket money.
You like to be able to like purchase a coffee for every video or two we upload.
Right, yeah, because basically it's going to be somewhere around every 1,000 views, it's $1. And by putting in more ads in, we can goose that number a little bit. But
to a couple bucks.
Yeah, so if you're watching a TV show, there's commercials every, 15 minutes? So in an hour, you'd get, and there's about 2 minutes worth of commercials, right?
Yeah.
Each commercial is, depending on what it is, typically 30 seconds, some are shorter, 15 seconds, but basically 2 minutes of ads every hour.
Yeah.
So I think it's not unreasonable. My typical go-to is in an hour video, I'll place an ad every 7.5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think that's unreasonable, and especially since there's a podcast where you don't actually have to watch anything.
Yeah, that's true. If you want to download our podcast format, then you can listen to this completely ad free, and that is something that we consistently upload for you, the listening audience. But yeah, no. So it's interesting that just I think at the end of the day, what you said is right. Where it's surprising that people are doing such a poor job of not of seeking out stuff that is making them unhappy.
Right. I mean, you've got to be old enough to be able to access a computer to do this stuff. And I don't want, again, I don't want it to be like that stereotypical joke about how, or insult where you're talking about how people are kids. But you've got to be old enough to be able to get on a computer, but young enough not to know how to prioritize your time so that you're not miserable.
Yeah, where it's like, hey, I think Soul Reaper has had a very long and storied history of disliking content that we put on our channel, and I don't mean disliking as in like clicking the dislike button, because we have no way of knowing, although I'm sure that's a possibility too, but just verbally sort of expressing displeasure for the stuff that we are putting out. And it's like, that's okay. You don't have to like our stuff. I don't even know if I found a random channel that was similar to but not exactly the same as ours somewhere online that I would like, you know, watch all of our content, and that's fine. I have no issue with that. I would just sort of pick content that I enjoyed instead of continuing to return to something that I thought was not great.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? One of the things, I want to point out two things actually. One thing was about how when you're growing up, the kind of things that we talked to you about.
Yeah.
But the other point I wanted to make was that I've totally lost my train of thought. All right, so let me make the point. When we were young, we specifically made a point of teaching you, don't be a dick. Because it's really unproductive. I mean, it might feel satisfying for a moment to just, you know, have no self-control.
Yeah.
But when you're difficult with people, you're not going to be getting the best from everybody else. And it's such a crappy way to live. Where, you know, there's just so much more, like when people are happy with you, they're just so much more helpful and friendly.
Yeah.
Like when you were young, I don't know if you remember all the times that when we go out with your mom, and the times and this is not really a great measure of anything, but the times that people would be so friendly toward you guys, and like just, I don't know, even giving you free stuff or whatever, just because of the way your mom is.
Basically, like, just good manners, yeah.
Yeah.
Being kind.
Right. And here's the other thing I was thinking of, is that one of the beautiful things about getting older was having control over my environment. And then being able to avoid all the stuff that I hated when I was younger. So that's why I always think when I see something like this, there's got to be a certain, not necessarily youth, but definitely a lack of, I don't know, control that's associated with youth.
Or just some decision-making process at some point has, I think, done these people a little dirty. Like Soul Reaper especially. I think there's some moment in time in which a decision was made that was just the wrong one for personal happiness and satisfaction. There was a moment where there was a choice, whether it was an implicit choice or an explicit one, where Soul Reaper decided, you know what, I'm going to keep following up with these videos every once in a while just to tell them that they suck.
Scratching an itch.
And I don't know if he's watching them. I mean, maybe he's not. That would actually be, I think, probably the most efficient use of his time, is if he just checked in every once in a while to say, hey, these videos are stupid. Just so you know, I still have the same opinion. That would be, I think, honestly, as a choice for him, that for his own like happiness and just quality of life, that's a choice that I could get behind, I think. Right. Because you're not actually dedicating a huge amount of time and effort to telling somebody else that their stuff sucks. But I think it's more entertaining from my perspective to imagine that he is actually just watching our content with like gritted teeth and being like, this is too many ads. You're stupid for
I'm counting them one at a time.
But he's like, you're stupid for having this many ads, and I hate you because I have to watch all these ads now to watch your video to tell you the ways in which they suck. And I know that's almost definitely not what's happening, but yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day either way. If he's just showing up and leaving, I'm just looking through the list of various comments throughout the ages from him now, and they're very he's very consistent. I'll give him that. So this is the most recent one. There's a couple from 3 months ago. F you, MF. Oh my god, you guys effing suck. This one, which is just, you guys eat ass, from 4 months ago. And then also 4 months ago, F you. 4 months ago, he calls us pussies. And then Awesome Gamer 241, which is also a username that I'm familiar with, but for much more positive reasons, says, hey, what's with the hate, man? If you don't like their content, stop watching. Which he obviously did not take the advice of. 5 months ago, gay. Oh man, these just scrolling back in time, I think yeah, the farther down you scroll, the more kind his comments are. There's a time 2 years ago where he was like where he found a glitch for us that wasn't really a glitch, and I was like, yeah, I'm a big fan of you guys. So there's definitely a sort of fall from grace that happens somewhere along the line for either us or for him. I don't know who exactly is at fault for this relationship degrading over time. I have a pretty good guess at where the blame lies, but
yeah. Oh, I wanted to mention, have you seen Afterlife on Netflix?
I have not. I've had it recommended to me, not by you. Now, okay, so I'm assuming you're recommending it.
I'm going to recommend it, and what reminded me of it was the idea of just being nice. So, Ricky Gervais, comedian, he's known for creating the original Office. He's got a brand of humor that's relatively, shall we say, acerbic. And, it's sometimes mean. And what I had
definitely a problematic fave if you like his stuff.
Yeah.
A little bit.
So this is it. So I'm watching the show because your mom watched it and thought it was good.
Yeah.
And so I'm watching it and I'm struggling with it because the first, I don't know, 3-4 episodes,
yeah,
the humor is that it's typical Ricky Gervais humor, and it's I'm not gonna spoil it, but it's in the context of a story where he has an excuse to be awful, but it felt like that. It felt just like it was an excuse for him to do his shtick, and I'm not a big fan of it. But then he surprised me completely by turning it around in a way that was quite interesting and satisfying.
Yeah?
Yeah, so there's a good payoff, and if you don't mind his humor and his comedy, then, you know, you won't have the same problem I did. But the first little bit, listen, it was funny, and it was clever, but it felt like it was an excuse.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know that the story was actually going anywhere to make it worth putting up with the kind of abusive kind of humor. You know, the one where somebody's getting laughed at.
Yeah.
And the humor is at somebody's expense.
You know, people call that like punching down, right? Especially when you're laughing at somebody who can't really defend themselves properly.
Right.
There was a really good thing that I think Travis McElroy said, where he was like, one of the best comments that he had ever. I'm paraphrasing here, where it's like one of like the better like compliments I've gotten about like the stuff that I make, and like especially like my Bim Bam, is that somebody told him that they don't really punch down and they don't really punch up and they just don't really do a lot of punching overall.
And that's not easy.
But I think that's probably, even if I hadn't realized it before other people helped me put it into words, it's probably actually a lot of the reason why I gravitate towards specific types of content, and especially specific types of humor, where it's not really at the expense of people the same way, or if it's at the expense of anybody, it's at the expense of specific people instead of, especially like instead of like groups, right? Because I think you can always laugh at one specific person being really weird, right? But as soon as you say, oh well, let's take that, and then let's just take that half a step back and generalize it to all the people that are that share at least one trait with this person are weird in the exact same way, and that's when it tends to become a little more iffy, right?
Because it's cringing. I feel like I'm cringing.
Yeah.
Right, when I listen to it, and so there's two instincts, right? When you see somebody getting picked on, there's two instincts, and they're totally divergent. One is you want to defend them because you think that's just really shitty, and then the other instinct is, don't look at me. I don't want to be picked on, right? And it's at some point when you do that kind of humor, you're going to be alienating enough people, or even if you're not directly alienating them, I mean, most people have at least enough empathy to feel badly when
for the wrong types of jokes.
Yeah, and when people get picked on, that's one of those things where, you know, even if you can't identify with people, you can empathize with them and think that was a crappy thing to say.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things is that in general, I think a lot of sort of society is actually set up that some jokes that are at the expense of people are seen as generally permissible. So I think when there are jokes that like hit a very large group of people the wrong way, that probably says something, because I think there's stuff that probably we shouldn't be saying that we can still largely get away with in jokes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Not necessarily for everything, but I think there's jokes that are still maybe generally problematic. I think those are one of the things that you sort of see what was previously okay that shouldn't have been okay when you hear other people start talking about it. And I think one thing that I've seen a lot more discussion of, and I don't know if that's just the spaces that I spend time in, or if it actually is more in the public eye, is like jokes about like prison sexual assault, like especially like don't drop the soap, right?
Yes,
where that's like that's one of those things that is like really really prevalent in comedy to like a weird extent, to the point where there was like jokes about it in like kids cartoons, right? Like I think like the Puss in Boots movie or some like Shrek thing like had that joke. Like,
did it? I never even noticed that.
Yeah, And so there's like the sort of like, oh, that's what happens in prison joke. Just talking specifically about sexual assault is incredibly prevalent to the point where it's like a cultural touchstone. There was a SpongeBob joke where SpongeBob called soap. He had bars of soap and he called them doubloons, and then he told Gary to not drop them. And it wasn't actually like, the joke wasn't actually directly about sexual assault anymore, but it was so prevalent that it was like, it was part of the zeitgeist, that it was like a meta joke about not being allowed to drop soap, right? Removed from its context maybe, but still like still like based off of that. So I think there's, when you realize that there's little sort of insidious stuff like that that's maybe not the greatest, that people are still allowed to pretty much across the board get away with, when you actually run into jokes that people do have issue with, I think it's fair to say that you've probably gone too far in one way or another.
And they're counting on I mean, you know, clearly the person who was what's the word I'm looking for? You know, the people who really were innocent and end up in jail don't find that funny. And if you have any kind of empathy for people in jail in general, I mean, here's the thing: taking away people's freedom, that's the punishment. Yeah. I don't know. It's no. I totally get that. But I also remember, oh, this one's totally a cheater. All the maxed out dark power stuff. Oh yeah, 2 of them. That's like 4 times as much valorium alloy as you should be able to have so far. And they didn't even max out. They didn't max augmentum. Oh my god.
Disappointing.
I am so disappointed. This is not going to be that hard to fight. Like they just okay. So anyways, let's not get distracted. Yeah. No. I totally. Yeah, you know, society's got a lot of fixing to do. You better get started. I'm not going to be around long enough to enjoy most of it or be able to make most of the change. So you got to get started real soon.
That's I don't know how I feel about that particular takeaway, but
joke at nobody's expense except for mine because I'm old.
That, you know what? That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next comment or comment/question comes from Ian Donegan, and they say, "Good video, guys. For fighting metal teams, I use my Injustice 2 Superman as a tank, as he hits 30k damage per heavy hit. Chop them down, then tag in Ares with the Tantu Totem and a Death Cart gear. Back row with Astro Harness to give you a breather. Also, do you guys have a good defense team? Or even teams that get attacked more to rack up potential defense victories? I play around with different setups, but none seem to attacked loads." So I assume it's like be attacked loads.
Yeah. I think what makes it more interesting now and why there no longer are the same magnet teams as before, because there used to be a much narrower range of stats, so probably a narrower range of like potential threat levels, meaning that if you were at the top, you would get everybody matched to you potentially, because they always have, the matchmaker tries to make them equal at the beginning and harder up into fight 6 and 7.
Yeah, so now it's I think part of it is also the number of people playing, you know?
I think that would actually work in your favor to try to get more draws, because with fewer people playing, then there's a limited number of teams that you could be drawn against.
No, I think with fewer people playing, depending on how they do the matchmaker, there's people who play like fewer people playing, but also people playing less frequently. So if people are playing like maybe like once a week or putting it in, just the from a pure numbers game, what would happen is with fewer people playing, there would be you'd need less battle points to be up there, but just from a standpoint of number of people that you could draw in, the number would also be much lower. And I think at this point there's a better chance that a lot of the players that you're playing against, especially up at that high level, are likely to have strategies to win against most teams, right? I think you have less people who are still playing that are coming in new and just barely building their way up to the skill level where they can fight against your guys if they're high enough in stats to be a magnet team. I think players probably have to have some like minimum level of expertise that makes it harder for you to get a lot of wins in defense mode, just as a general rule.
So fewer players, larger proportion of them are good, like you said, and the value of the teams is spread out more.
Yeah,
I think that all hurts, so that you can't. Because I still remember when Darkseid, not the good one, and Shazam would be two of the necessary characters you'd have on a magnet team, where you could draw like 1,000 fights in a season and win maybe like 100 of them. I've had a season like that.
And I think for that, all you would need is to, like, you could really draw people as low as, like, I think at that point, like, mid-range gold teams would eventually be fighting, squaring off against that. Whereas there's so much stratification that that's just not true anymore.
Oh, that's a good word, stratification. Right, with the separation. So, you know, defense wins used to have a huge amount of value, and I still have a little bit of problem. So I guess the answer is we don't have a specific defense team. We just leave in our offense team all the time, which turns out to be a not bad defense team if you're looking at just percentage wins.
Yeah.
You know, a defense win is obviously harder than an offense win. I still don't like the idea of valuing it more, where you can get enough points to make up for not playing. Because to me, the idea of being rewarded for not playing is kind of a bad one, and it means the game is not as good as it could be.
Yeah, but I do think it is I think it would be better if there was more of an aspect of strategy about it. You know, I think it would be it would make more sense if there was some more interactive system, because really the problem is that no matter what the and if the actual strategy was better, because I think at this point the real strategy is to make a team as annoying to fight as possible, right? That still draws people.
Right.
And I think that's actually sort of like a bad thing for them to ask you to do, and I think it would make more sense to me if there was some, if there was more of an aspect of actual active action with setting a defense team.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, just spitballing, if there was resource systems where you could you know, I don't know, apply boosts to people or do something. If there's any component other than just sticking people in, I would feel more okay with actually rewarding people for that sort of strategic behavior. But as is, there's not a lot of reason, I think, to give people a ton of defense battle points with the system as it stands.
Yeah, not that it doesn't happen. It's just I find myself not exactly what you said. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So there we go. We have made this go pretty long. Do you think we should go through this one last question?
Yeah, sure. Well, one more. I think we got time for one more. We've got a couple fights.
Okay, there we go. This one comes from Karlos, and this is the person who was able to get 3 characters back, and then the $250 refund because they lost their account. So, I'm just going to read the question as is. Just to clarify, it's a $250 American, or sorry, it's a $250 American dollar refund. I read $250 because there's a dollar sign, but so there's a little bit of redundancy built into the statement. So it's a $250 American dollar refund, which is, you know, what I had initially guessed. Also, after reading the fine print, the 3 characters would be characters I already have. I also noticed the game.
Wait. If they already know what characters he's got and they'd be able to decide, they should just give him his old account back.
That is true. Yeah, I'm not sure what the implication is here. I think that might be an honor system thing, maybe, where they say, oh, well, you couldn't have had these characters yet, so it doesn't count.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. If that's the case, they should just give the account back. I also noticed the game gets crippled in Survivor in multiplayer mode only when the reward is gear. The last 2 challenges, Scarecrow and TT, what is that? Tantu Totem, crippled it. But 3 weeks ago, the challenge was a character, and Survivor and multiplayer both worked. I'm hoping Warner Brothers updates the game and these issues go away. I'm not holding my breath. At this point, I'm ready to just walk away. 3 character upgrades but no gears is a waste of time. My question to you guys, I know you guys don't advocate the 2-device glitch, but do you think I can get a clean save to Warner Brothers servers to clean up this crippling issue? I figure I have nothing to lose. I get banned, I was walking away anyways. Your thoughts?
I completely agree. When there's nothing left to lose is when it's worth taking the risk, and to me it's the sibling or the brother to the idea that when you make a game too frustrating, then there's really nothing to stop people from wanting to cheat, because otherwise they're just giving up on the game anyways.
Yeah, so if you're still at the point where you have your account and it's visible and it's just unplayable for you mostly, anything that you can do to maybe fix it would be worthwhile.
Yeah.
If there's absolutely anything you can do to maybe salvage it, versus having something that's functionally unplayable, you know, if it's worth the loss, if you're gonna leave otherwise, there's no sort of harm in taking the risk. The only harm is if you actually would prefer to just be freed and not want to actually stay with the game. If this would have left a bad taste in your mouth, or if this is just a good natural stopping point, and if that's the case, then, you know, still do whatever you want. But unless you really want to walk away, if you're gonna do it anyways, yeah, go ahead. I mean, I would say do whatever is necessary to maybe fix your troubles.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember. I mean, this channel came so close to not even existing when we lost. Remember, we lost our first account when Shazam was added to gold packs.
Yeah.
And then doing the refund glitch, there was a problem with our third-party save, and we came this close to completely losing it.
I remember, yeah, that was a stressful time.
And maybe not starting it again. I mean, you know, and since then we've actually started and, in my mind, completed a few other accounts. So we probably could have kept on going, but I think at that point it was new enough and it was frustrating enough that we probably would have walked away from Injustice, I think.
I am glad we didn't.
Yeah, me too. Because we wouldn't be having this conversation in this form right now if we had.
So there we go. I think that finishes up all the questions for this week. Just to finish up with our regular discussion of our Patreon, patreon.com/BDCKR, or you can click our channel icon in the bottom right corner at the end of this video if you want to support us on Patreon. But more importantly, as always, are the people who have already made that decision to help us out, and even more than help us out, because at the end of the day, it's nice, but it's not directly necessary, to show that they like our stuff enough that they want to support us monetarily, because that to me is probably actually more meaningful than the money itself. Is just that sort of people liking us enough that they think we warrant it.
Right.
So we need to give a huge thank you to. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. Console Peasant and Eddy G, who are supporting us at the highest last word tier. iProphet, also known as iProphet 3, who is supporting us at the Your Message Here tier. And Shawn, Farrell, and Daniel Simonson, who support us on the credited level. And Lazo Georgiades and Chris Wolf at the gratitude level.
So there we go. Thank you guys so much, and thank you so much to all of you for watching or listening. We will see you next time. Komoda.